Have you ever wondered how a massive, world-changing light bulb idea actually gets turned into a credible, peer-reviewed piece of science? Well, welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to take a really fascinating behind-the-scenes look at exactly how that happens. Today, we're opening up the actual case files on 3 real academic guidance notes from July 2026. We're going to see how expert academic advisors take these eager, sky-high student pitches and gently, or sometimes not so gently, bring them back down to a reality where reliable data can actually be gathered. It's honestly a masterclass in the scientific method.
Here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the research ambition trap, dive into 3 totally different case studies covering freeze-drying, ADHD, and autism research, and then we'll wrap up with the golden rules of study design.
All right, Section 1, the research ambition trap, when wanting to change the world meets academic reality.
Let's jump into Section 2, our first case study, freeze-drying, focusing on scope and equipment checks.
Okay, check out this quote from a third-year undergrad's pitch. They wanted to tackle, and I quote, optimizing freezing rates, determining exact collapse temperatures, and enhancing reconstitution properties for long-term storage. I mean, the ambition here is just massive. But the academic advisor immediately threw a red flag. Why? Because pulling off exact collapse temperature mapping requires insanely specialized, expensive gear like advanced freeze-drying microscopy or complex OCT-based methods. That's just way too broad and complex for an undergrad project without expert infrastructure.
Now, to be fair, lyophilization, which is just the technical term for freeze-drying, is a fantastic topic. It's absolutely crucial for preserving structure, nutrients, probiotics, and sensitive stuff. But as the advisor's guidance note points out, any project in this field lives or dies by the actual equipment sitting in your lab. Are we talking about access to a -80-degree freezer, a moisture analyzer, a spectrophotometer? The hard truth of science is that you literally cannot study what you cannot physically measure.
So we get this brilliant reality check. Instead of a high-tech sci-fi dream involving multi-omics and monoclonal antibodies, the advisor brings the student crashing back to Earth. The new realistic scope? Testing the pre-freezing temperature of a single carrot cube. Yep, a carrot. The student has to narrow everything down to just one product, like one fruit pulp, one vegetable slice, or one safe probiotic culture, and isolate just 1 or 2 things they can actually measure.
But the advisor doesn't just shut the student down, which is great. They offer a clear menu of doable directions. There's a food option, like checking how pre-freezing temps affect carrot slices, or an alternative comparing freeze-drying to hot air drying on fruit pulp, or if the lab has the right microbiome facilities, a biotech option looking at safe lactic acid bacteria. It just goes to show that you can still do incredibly rigorous science by keeping it simple and playing to the strengths of the resources you actually have.
So the big takeaway for this student is to hit the brakes on changing the world and take 3 very practical steps. 1, confirm the actual lab facilities. 2, pick exactly 1 sample and 1 primary outcome. And 3, whip up a tight 1-page concept note within 5 working days before touching any actual lab equipment.
Moving on to Section 3, Case 2, ADHD mobility. We're looking at study design and measurement limits here.
We are making a huge pivot here, going from food engineering to pediatric physiotherapy. A postgraduate student wanted to assess mobility in children with ADHD. But wow, did they fall into some academic traps. First off, they wanted a guaranteed Scopus Index publication, and they relied on AI-generated sample sizes. The advisor had to step in sharply here. You absolutely cannot guarantee journal acceptance before a study is even designed, and you for sure cannot rely on AI summaries for your sample sizes. You have to read the original, peer-reviewed full texts to get real effect sizes. The reality is, this pitch needs to be reframed entirely into a strict analytical, cross-sectional comparative study.
To actually make this work, the reviewer insisted on using specific, validated tools. Since the student wanted to measure balance and mobility, the advisor pointed them to the Pediatric Balance Scale, or PBS, because it has really strong, broad pediatric validity. For mobility, they recommended the timed up and go, the TUG test. But there was a major caveat here. Direct ADHD-specific evidence for the TUG test in kids is actually really limited, so the student has to be totally transparent about that limitation in their write-up.
What's really interesting is the study design required to pull this off scientifically. To make this publishable, the student needs an analytical, cross-sectional comparative design. That means taking a group of children medically diagnosed with ADHD and comparing them to a control group of age and sex-matched, typically developing children. And that ADHD diagnosis
It can't just be a guess or a feeling. It has to be confirmed by a psychiatrist, pediatrician, or documented clinical record.
The advisor really lays down the law here with some massive red flags the student must avoid. First, a cross-sectional study only shows an association. It can never, ever claim cause and effect. Second, ditch the blind AI references. Third, and this is a huge one in clinical studies, do not ignore medication status. You have to know, are these kids medicated, unmedicated, are they on a medication holiday during the test? You also can't ignore comorbidities like anxiety or autism spectrum disorder. You have to account for all of it.
So the immediate homework for this postgrad is pretty clear-cut. First, confirm if they are actually going to include that typically developing control group. Second, figure out exactly how they'll document the clinical diagnosis and handle the medication status. And finally, get back to the advisor within 5 working days with a 1-page concept note laying out all these feasibility details.
All right, Section 4, Case 3, Autism Interventions. This one is all about ethics and the serious danger of assuming efficacy.
This final case brings us into a highly sensitive area of research. A postgraduate physiotherapy student wants to test the effect of structured therapy ball activities on balance in children with autism spectrum disorder. But there is a line in the student's submission that is instantly alarming to the reviewers. The student literally wrote that they are, quote, currently at the data collection stage. In human subject research, especially involving vulnerable kids, starting data collection before all your protocols and ethics are totally locked down is a massive, massive red flag.
The reality check on this one is severe. The advisor did a rapid evidence map and found that direct evidence for therapy balls specifically helping kids with ASD is actually very limited and low level. So the student cannot run around framing this as some proven treatment for ASD balance deficits. Instead, they have to honestly frame this as a single-group pre-post pilot study, a feasibility study. This is preliminary science, guys, not a definitive proven trial.
Because of just how sensitive this is, the advisor issues a list of urgent requirements. The student cannot assume clinical efficacy. They need to detail their precise intervention protocol immediately, like how many weeks, how many sessions, exactly how many minutes per session, what are the safety precautions. They also have to clearly define their inclusion criteria, like can the child even follow the instructions? And they are strictly warned, do not call this an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, unless you actually used random allocation.
Because they are dangerously already collecting data, this isn't just normal homework. This is academic triage. The advisor essentially tells them to STOP, drop everything. They must clarify their ethics approval immediately. If ethics aren't approved, data collection ends right now. They have a highly compressed window, just 48 hours, to revert with their ethics status and their current anonymized data collection sheet.
And finally, Section 5, the Golden Rules of Research. Let's look at the universal takeaways for scientific design.
When we look across these totally diverse fields, whether we're freeze-drying carrots, measuring ADHD mobility, or testing therapy balls for autism, these case files give us 5 golden rules. Number 1, isolate and measure just one variable at a time based on what you can actually observe. Number 2, confirm your lab facilities and get strict ethics approval before you do anything. Number 3, don't blind trust AI. Verify AI-generated sample sizes by reading the actual full-text papers. Number 4, never guarantee journal acceptance up front. And number 5, be brutally honest about your limitations. If it's a cross-sectional study, call it an association. If it's a small pre-post test, call it a pilot study. Be honest.
So the final thought I want to leave you with today, whether you're a student, a seasoned researcher, or just someone who loves reading up on science, is this. When you see a new study, ask yourself, are they trying to change the entire world with one single paper, or are they trying to measure one small, real part of it perfectly? Because as we've seen today, true scientific progress doesn't come from a single flashy, ambitious pitch. It comes from focused, ethical, and perfectly measured reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the science.